Hey, this is my fourth time trying to get this damn thing to work. And it's early. It's still early. I'm glad I tried to do this early because I just spent the last 3 minutes clicking out, coming back, reloading the whole thing. Just would not connect. It just kept doing the whole going live, going live. I don't know. I don't know if it's my internet, my laptop it's old. It's still pretty up to date, considering I got like the latest and greatest in video gaming console laptops, way more than I needed for simply writing books and doing this kind of thing. But anyways, we are back with the Oklahoma City bombing series. We're again reading from the Medusa File 2, Craig Roberts, because I just found out today, because I have not been keeping up with any of this stuff. The Order movie about the bank robbers in the 1980s that, are kind of directly linked to the whole bombing situation. That movie came out December 6th of last year, and it's not on, well, I think it's on DVD, but it's like $12-15. And then if you want to stream it online, it's like $5.99 every damn place. Amazon. So anyways, I will not be watching that anytime soon. Unfortunately, because I think it'd be a very interesting movie. I want to see how exactly they put all that together. If they even mention the aftermath of the Order and the bank robbery and Elohim City and all of that stuff that came afterwards. Robert Snell, executed April 19th, 1995. Kind of weird, right? So, chapter 14. Yeah, we're skipping around. We're trying to find all the goodies in here. But this has a lot of highlighted stuff in it. So apparently there was a lot, and it's not that long of a chapter. So perhaps this will just be one episode. Midwest bank robbers, connection or diversion. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, A Scandal in Bohemia. Never date Bohemian chicks because they're usually communist. You don't ever marry a communist because she doesn't belong to you. She belongs to the people. The first time I met JD Cash was at a meeting in Oklahoma City with Representatives Keyes, Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee. There were about a dozen people there who were doing their part in trying to get to the truth about the bombing and who and how many were behind it, and also if the government had foreknowledge that could have saved lives or stopped the bombing. The government does not care about you. Cash, a thin, grizzled man who obviously was a heavy smoker which affected his voice and the number of wrinkles in his face, was across the table from where I sat. I had heard his name through David Hoffman, but until then had not met him. To my right, 2 chairs down, wearing a black leather jacket, was a retired Marine Corps lieutenant named Roger Charles. Roger had worked as an investigative journalist for 60 Minutes until the network shut down all reports that went outside of the official McVeigh-Nichols line. I always wondered where I saw that story about Terrence Yeaky and his self-deletion. I wonder if it was 60 Minutes. He and I were the only Marines on the team, and in my mind, I felt he could be a good asset because we both shared the same spirit of the Corps. We all took turns sharing what we had developed so far. When it came to J.D. Cash, he was introduced as an investigative reporter for the McCurtain Daily Gazette, or as Cash sometimes referred to it, the McCurtain County Gazette. The Gazette is a small town rural farm newspaper located in Id- Idabel, Oklahoma, which is in the far southeast corner of the state, just a few miles from both Texas and Arkansas. Not exactly a newspaper that would pay a reporter to spend full-time assignment on one story for such a small circulation newspaper. Idabel, population of just over 7,000, was a town I had heard of but never visited. All I knew in my previous 44 years in Oklahoma was that it was down there somewhere near Louisiana or Texas, and that it was in a part of the state famous for organized crime, including the infamous Dixie Mafia, marijuana growing, and a place where a lot of desperados hid out from before statehood up to the present time. Oh, okay. So even before it became a state. When Cash began his briefing, it was all about the Midwest bank robbers who he and Roger Charles were following in their investigation. Cash was positive that it was the direction the entire investigation should take and was determined to make the case that the gang was tied in with McVeigh militias and white supremacists. I'm kind of surprised that the Democrats aren't a white supremacists. This raised red flags to me, as I personally knew that no one in any Oklahoma militia was involved in the case. Because anytime McVeigh or Strassmeyer or any of the other guys showed up at a militia meeting, they're all like, get out. In case I had met a few militia leaders in my investigation who felt that they were being set up by the feds to take the blame and that it all had to do with the attacks, the right wing used the militias as scapegoats. I have to get the dogs. I should have done that before I even started this. Okay, sorry about the dead air. Let's see here. In fact, we had met a few militia leaders in my investigation who felt that they were being set up by the feds, because they were, to take the blame, and that it all had to do with attacking the right wing, using the militias as scapegoats. In fact, I had traveled to Eufaula, Oklahoma, to meet with Ross Hullett, leader of the Oklahoma Citizens Militia. It's funny because Missouri, like, it's in their constitution that every able-bodied male is basically part of like the state militia, and that's not including the National Guard. So it's like part of the state, if you will. Or I guess you could say state sanctioned, like you should be in a militia type thing. A small group that was mainly concerned with the direction the county was headed under the Clinton administration. Hullett told me that he knew several militia leaders around the country in such states as Arizona, Michigan, Montana, Texas, and Alabama. They all agreed that the bombing was being used as a witch hunt against what Washington politicians now feared was a citizens' uprising. He said, look, if we had known the bombing in Oklahoma City was going to take place, we'd have guarded the building, not blown it up. But did Cash have a line on others unknown in regards to the bank robbers who, like Nichols' Philippine Muslim connections, may have provided funding? Yeah, the whole Nichols thing, that's they dive so deep into that, into nothingness, that yeah. It was becoming mind-boggling. Money and training from the Philippines all the way up to Osama bin Laden. Yeah, this is stuff like this is why Craig Roberts was kind of like discredited for his book. But it's not to say that there aren't there isn't useful information in here. Money from the Mexican drug cartels, now more money from bank robbers. The whole Mexican drug cartel thing. I got halfway through one chapter and I was like, this is bullshit. And I just ended up skipping anything that regarded Mexican drug cartels. Just how much money would be needed to finance one truck bomb? Yeah, that's a good question. Like any redneck can go rent a Ryder truck, right? It might take a lot, not just for the materials, but the payoffs to anyone involved. If McVeigh and Nichols had gotten away, and if others were involved, and I assure you that there were several, then how much would it have cost to pay them all off, or to relocate them with false identities out of the country and provide for their future expenses? And was cash flowing into such places as Elohim City? Only time would tell, but there was something about the demeanor of JD Cash that had me that to me just didn't add up. I put him in the gotta watch this guy list. See here, other people at the meeting. I'm going to see if I can skip some of this. Mideast Iraq. Let's get to the second time I met John David Cash III. Was when Tulsa attorney Larry Oliver called me and asked if I could meet with him regarding the Oklahoma City bombing. Oliver was representing some of the OKC victims and their relatives in a lawsuit against Timothy McVeigh and against the government. Why would they have a case against the government? I had known Oliver for years during my time as the Tulsa Police Department. My first wife was the Tulsa City Attorney's secretary at City Hall. How many wives did this dude have? And I met Larry during some of the various joint holiday parties held by Tulsa City legal offices, as well as various judges, lawyers around town. Larry was a good guy. He was probably boning your wife. Spence was famous for not having ever lost a criminal prosecution or defense case. Some of his cases included Randy Weaver, Karen Silkwood's family, and even Philippine First Lady Imelda Marcos. Philippine First Lady. Who in federal court in New York had been accused of racketeering. Yada, yada, yada. Can we get to the fucking bank robbers? Good Lord. I sat across from Larry, and he explained that he had been retained to represent the Wilburn family in a lawsuit against Timothy McVeigh and against the government. The suit claimed that the government had foreknowledge of the event, and that if the government had warned others, then the Wilburn's grandchildren, Chase, age 3, and Colton, age 2, who were in the daycare center in the Murrah building, would not have died in the bombing. Still no bank robbers. Bank robbers? Let's see here. I knew right then that my suspicion about JD Cash had been right. Not only did he believe the case should focus on the bank robbers, but away from any other direction that might lead to more than what he wanted known by the public. All of his articles for the Gazette focused on Midwest bank robbery gang, which the FBI had codenamed Bomb Rob. Bomb Rob? That sucks. FBI, come on, Bomb Rob. And not on the other areas we were following as a group, as we had JD trying to divert the investigation and McGully trying to derail it. I just didn't know how much at the time. Cash was not totally wrong in following the Midwest bank robbers as they became known. There was some meat there, and as time went by, we began to see more of a connection to the case. The main connection seemed to be in the various individuals involved and a few possible contacts of some of the suspects with McVeigh and Strassmeyer. There was also a gun show connection, and we knew that McVeigh and Strassmeyer both frequented gun shows, as did some of the robbers who we discovered claimed to be in what they called the Aryan Republican Army, or ARA. It only took you like 6 pages. The robbers, according to FBI reports, funded their anti-government ARA operations with loot from the robberies. To me, these so-called operations were just an excuse to rob banks and an attempt to legitimize their crimes to a gullible portion of the public. As more and more information came in, with a significant amount of credit to J.D. Cash and Roger Charles, who was also determined to pursue the bank robbers' leads, the members of the gang were identified. At the time, the main members were Michael Bruscia, Mark William Thomas, Richard Lee Guthrie, Pete Langen, Kevin McCarthy. Sounds like an obscure member of the Beatles. And Scott Studford. Eventually, we could tie in brothers Chevy and Shane Kehoe. Yeah, the Kehoe brothers. That's another side story. Bruscia and Guthrie at one time resided in Elohim City. At the same time, Strassmeyer was security director there, and Dennis Mahon had a travel trailer on the property. During that time, McVeigh visited Elohim at least once and was seen there by Carol Howe. We covered this in the previous chapter. Michael William Bruscia, born to a firefighter father and accountant mother in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was both a member of the ARA and a part-time student in LaSalle University. It would be much later when we would discover that he was also an informant for the FBI and that the FBI knew of many of the robberies and who was involved, and even when they would happen in advance. It sounds like that family has got quite the lawsuit. However, as in many FBI cases, they allowed the robberies to continue until they could manage to catch much bigger fish. One example of this was Roger Wheeler's murder case in Tulsa in 1981, in which two Boston Irish mob hitmen of the Winter Hill Gang, Johnny Martorano and Stephen the Rifleman Fleming, murdered Tulsa businessman and president of Telex Inc., Roger Wheeler. As he was getting into his car in Tulsa's Southern Hills Country Club, Wheeler had been responsible for stopping the payouts to the mob, which he acquired when he acquired World J. Ali in Florida. He also killed in the same time frame in Florida was J. Ali federal president John Callahan. Both killings were in order of the Winter Hill Gang's boss, James Joseph Whitey Bulger. Okay, 1981. I remember when they caught Whitey Bulger. Yeah. All right. Bulger was also an informant for the FBI. For decades after Wheeler's murder, when Tulsa detectives spearheaded by Sergeant Mike Huff were working the case, the FBI protected Bulger simply to keep him on the inside as an informant regarding mob activities in Boston. A movie about Bulger was made in 2006 titled Black Mass. It depicted his activities, including the Wheeler murder. Johnny Depp also does a very realistic job of playing Bulger. Who cares? Smith Wilburn's lawsuit that Larry Oliver filed was based on the assumption that Bruscia was John Doe number 2 and was thought to have helped McVeigh orchestrate the bombing. The Daily Telegraph also ran an interview with a witness named Connie Smith, who said, "I kept telling them that the man in the John Doe number 2 sketch that came out of the bombing was that Mike guy, that nice looking guy, dark skinned. But the FBI made me feel guilty, then ignorant, as if I didn't know what I was saying. Then later I tried to call in with more information and they couldn't even talk to me." Yeah, that doesn't sound suspicious at all. Bruscia did bear a resemblance to one of the John Doe sketches, but so did Hussein Husseini. Didn't want to rule him out, but it could take more than a resemblance to a sketch to make the case for me. Cash needed to tie him with McVeigh to satisfy Oliver and Smith's case. Richard Lee Guthrie Jr., one of the four main characters in the gang, and the ARA had participated in several of the robberies. According to Dennis Mahon, who knew Guthrie had given much of the money from the robberies to the Aryan nation. Guthrie had also been a suspect in multiple murders of an Arkansas family named Mueller, whose guns, cash, and gold had been stolen. Eventually, the actual murderers were found out to be two brothers, Chevy and Shane Kehoe, two self-proclaimed white supremacists and friends of Terry Nichols, who had sold guns to Nichols. After Guthrie was arrested, he admitted to being a member of the ARA and to having robbed banks. He also insisted that there was more to the story, but before he could relate it, which he said he had prepared to do, both to a grand jury and to a future book he was planning to write, he was found dead in his cell. From the ceiling with bed sheets. Self-deletion, I believe, is what they're trying to make it look like. In one report of the death of Guthrie, he was found dead of an apparent self-deletion Friday morning in a county jail in Kentucky, jolting a growing federal investigation into the white supremacist violence. The death of 38-year-old Richard Lee Guthrie Jr. came little more than a week after his pledge, according to a sealed plea agreement in U.S. District Court to provide authorities with information about organizations, quote, whose goal was to overthrow of the U.S. government and to engage in domestic terrorism. The report went on to state Guthrie had confessed his involvement with the Midwest bank robbers who taunted the FBI for nearly 2 years, wearing fanciful costumes, leaving pipe bombs at crime scenes, and stealing more than $250,000. He pleaded guilty in April to 3 bank robberies in Ohio, and last Wednesday to 16 more in 7 states, as well as to the weapons charges and credit card fraud. In his last known interview, a 10-minute phone call on Thursday, Guthrie said he was planning to write a book that goes a lot more deeper than the robberies about his life in the white supremacist movement. It'll all come out, he said. It appears that Guthrie was ready to spill his guts on more than just robberies. He had been involved in the Aryan Nations movement and had been a frequent visitor to Hayden Lake, Idaho, headquarters of the Aryan Nation, and a place also frequented by Dennis Mahon and his friends, white Aryan resistance leader Tom Metzger. The report went on to say 2 other men, Kevin McCarthy and Scott Stedford, also members of the ARA, are being held in connection with the robberies. Guthrie said he met Stedford through Aryan Nation leader Mark Thomas. McCarthy lived in a trailer on the property Thomas rented. According to another former follower of Thomas, McCarthy had also lived at Elohim City, an Oklahoma compound of believers of Christian identity and white supremacist religion. Yeah, all these guys are tied together. Just a big gay white supremacist love fest. Richard Guthrie fell victim to the adage, dead men don't tell tales, on July 12, 1996. Guthrie was found dead in his cell. He was in a solitary confinement cell. God, this sounds so familiar. Like he was Epstein before Epstein was even a thing, right? And it was immediately declared a self-deletion. But there's more to the story than that, and having self-deletion, the numerous self-deletions of those who fell astray of the Clintons and the Janet Reno Justice Department. I had my doubts. According to his public defender, W. Kelly Johnson, Guthrie had recently told he would soon be transferred from the Kenton County Detention Center in Covington, Kentucky, in preparation for testimony at a Columbus Ohio hearing for fellow ARA member Peter Langen. And according to jailers' logs, nothing was amiss in Guthrie's cell, where he was kept in isolation and where he was checked at 5:22 a.m., then at 6:06 a.m. A guard discovered the body hanging from the ceiling air vent. If one were to believe the self deletion story, Guthrie, who was planning to tell all, decided to delete himself, then accomplished that in 44 minutes. Hey, maybe the dude had a plan. I don't know. 2 notes, one addressed to his lawyer and one to a family member, were found. Guthrie's younger brother, Nicholas, said that he thought the death was suspicious. No. What bothers me is he was looking to the future, he said. Well, yeah, book, right? Bunch of interviews and stuff. Indeed, Richard Guthrie told the Los Angeles Times on the day before, I got a lot to do in the next few weeks. I got a couple of grand juries to present to. Guthrie's death would stop any of his testimony and any effort at a tell all book. Peter Langen, one of Guthrie's cohorts, was an asset to the Secret Service in 1993. Really? When he was released from jail in Georgia after agreeing to infiltrate the Aryan nation. But sometime that year, he disappeared and was not found until he and others were arrested in 1996. According to January 1995 FBI memo, Langen, when being interviewed by FBI agents, admitted to the ARA having a hit list. When asked who was on the list, he said Bill Clinton, Louis Freeh, Janet Reno, Howard Metzenbaum. He said that they had been tried. He said that they had been tried in absentia and had death sentences handed down against them. Langen, like Guthrie and others, had all visited or stayed at Elohim City one or more times. I wonder why Metzenbaum was on the list. When I looked into Metzenbaum's career, 3 things stuck out. He was a liberal anti-gun senator, he helped author and push through the anti-gun Brady bill, and he was a Jew. Any one of these would put him on a hate list of the ARA, war, and the Order, among others. Mark Thomas, head of the Aryan Nation's Eastern Command, was instrumental in forming an additional cell known as Unit 7. Unit 7 would be responsible for deleting judges and others in courtrooms in what they called a massacre that would start the next revolution. Thomas also stated in 1997, when he was arrested, that ARA member Kevin McCarthy assisted McVeigh in the bombing. He did not say how, but it was possible that it was either Brusha or McCarthy that was seen in the second Ryder truck with Dennis Mahon in Bricktown the day of the bombing, if that second John Doe was not Strassmeyer. Then there was the statement of Tim McVeigh's sister Jennifer, who told federal investigators that her brother told her that he was involved in robbing some banks and that she had laundered some of the cash for them. She also, at one point, said that her brother admitted to being part of a special operations unit that did illegal things for the government. Dun, 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 dun. In my file on McVeigh, which was growing bigger all the time, I remembered the part where early on I had traced McVeigh during his Army active duty service from Fort Riley to Fort Bragg to attend Special Forces training. Then, according to the Army, he went AWOL, or disappeared. No one seemed to know where he was. That is, no one except for those who he worked for at CalSpan as a security guard, which required a security clearance. Also, McVeigh received an honorable discharge from the Army in 1991, allegedly because he failed his Special Forces qualification test, but was videotaped in 1993 in uniform at Camp Grafton, North Dakota, almost 2 years after he was discharged. That tape is highly disputed. His eyebrows are too dark, which I don't know, man. My daughter, she goes from like blonde in the summer to like brown hair in the winter. So who knows? Plus, I think McVeigh was primarily a blonde too, but if you're wearing a hat all the time, those eyebrows are going to darken. So who knows? What is hard to understand is that the ARA was adamant, according to its members, about overthrowing the federal government. But the ARA was full of federal informants who knew everything that was going on. Still, the gang continued to rob banks, and according to what little information we were able to glean, the FBI knew in advance of the robberies, but still let them occur. Or maybe that was one part of the FBI, but not the part that was chasing bank robbers. Sort of like the FBI in Boston protecting Winter Hill gang, the Winter Hill gang, while the Tulsa FBI was trying to solve the Wheeler murder. That in the intelligence world is called compartmentalization. Besides the ARA bank robbers, there were other individuals who came to light later in the game. The others that surfaced involved robberies of two different Arkansas gun dealers and the murder of one of them and his family. The first was the robbery of a gun dealer named Roger Moore, who lived in the Royal, Arkansas vicinity. Royal is located in south central Arkansas, west of Hot Springs. In that robbery, which occurred November 5th, 1984. 1984? 94. He's got a typo in here. This was 94. Moore was bound with duct tape while his house was searched and his guns, gold, and silver coins were taken. Moore lived to tell about it, and he told authorities that he suspected a former house guest named Timothy McVeigh was involved. He had shown McVeigh his guns and bragged about having gold and silver. Later, a federal grand jury would report that the robbery was indeed linked to McVeigh, Nichols, and Michael Fortier, an army buddy of both McVeigh and Nichols. 33 of the guns taken in the robbery were later recovered beneath the floor of Nichols' home in Arkansas. Yeah, and it was Nichols that robbed him, and by all accounts, it sounds like Roger Moore was just like, here, take my stuff. You're going to need it. The second was William Mueller. Mueller was a gun dealer who, along with his wife Nancy and her 8-year-old daughter Sarah, lived in a cabin near a tiny community of Tilley, Arkansas, located in northwest Arkansas, just east of the Ozark National Forest. In other words, in the middle of nowhere, as people in the part of the country described it. It is heavily wooded and rural, and you would have to know exactly how to get there to find the Mueller cabin. William Mueller had done very well at gun shows, as he had a very large and expensive collection of guns. He also saved and hoarded cash, gold, silver for the end times of Bible prophecy. His unforeseen problem, however, was the company he kept. Somewhere along the way, he had run into some of the ARA bank robbers and also Timothy McVeigh. Some reports say Mueller even knew Nichols, but I have not seen any evidence of that. However, he met them. It seemed logical. It may have been at Elohim City. This had become a gathering place for like-minded radicals, many of whom were proving to be FBI and ATF informants, with even the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, having contact with Strassmeyer while he was there. Or they could have met at gun shows, the largest in the nation being Wanenmacher show held by Tulsa Joe Wanenmacher in Tulsa twice a year. Because of the accumulation of guns and money, Mueller became a target for his friends, who he thought could be trusted. But instead, his friends decided that Mueller would be an easy target for robbery. On January 5th, 1996, the Muellers were preparing to attend a gun show in Springdale or the huge Wanenmacher show in Tulsa, but never left their cabin. Neighbors had become concerned and went to check on the family, which they had not seen leave as expected. They noted that the Mueller animals were locked up and had not been fed. Mueller had foretold this. In February 1995, Mueller, a Special Forces veteran and no pushover, reported that his home had been broken into and some $35,000 to $50,000 worth of silver bars, gun parts, and ammunition had been taken. He later told friends that he thought he knew who the burglars were and that they would be back and they would kill him. The ammunition was later found in a room in a hotel in Missouri that Terry Nichols had rented. It was traced by lot number compared to the records that Mueller kept. Mueller told a friend, George Eaton, a fellow patriot, who lived in Uniontown, Arkansas, across the border from Elohim City, that he thought he was the target of an assassination, but was not home when the robbery occurred. He told Eaton this because he had he had been having trouble with the ATF concerning the type of products his family was selling at gun shows. The products that Mueller was selling at the gun shows were more than just guns. Mueller was selling gun parts, ammunition, and anti-government videotapes, books, and other literature, and passing out George Eaton's Patriot Report, a home-generated anti-Clinton government and anti-union newsletter. Psst. Mueller told an Arkansas news reporter, Gene Wergis, that they had written a letter to their congressman detailing their feelings about the ATF's harassment, and told Wegas that the promoters of the gun shows ordered him to stop selling the literature and videotapes because the ATF had threatened the show promoters that it would cause them problems. Oh no, not problems. Nobody wants problems. No, stop the problems. Mueller showed Wegas a spiral binder in which he kept his notes. He told Wegas that he was especially concerned about two men who had given him trouble at one show. He believed they were ATF agents. They were incensed that Mueller, because of the literature he was selling and the two names he had written down there, Andreas Strassmeyer and Michael Brescia. This would be totally out of character for both Strassmeyer and Brescia. They or their legend would be anti-government. To maintain this cover, they would have brought literature from Mueller, not condemned it. When neighbors called the authorities to check on the family, Mueller, his wife, and his daughter were not at their home. It is believed that they were killed there and their bodies moved to an unknown location, or that they were abducted and killed elsewhere. No one knows for sure. An investigation by neighbors reported that much of the Mueller's property was missing. On January 28th, 1996, a bound and badly decomposed bodies of the Muellers were finally found by a fisherman in a swampy bayou in Pope County. When he saw a leg floating on the water and called the county sheriff. One of the divers who helped recover the remains of the Muellers was Ron Stokes, one of the many dive team members when I ran the Mays County, Oklahoma emergency dive recovery team. He told me that they were bound with duct tape and plastic bags over their heads. It looked to me like they probably suffocated. One of my Arkansas sources sent me a copy of a letter written by George Eaton on his Patriot News, a Christian Patriot newsletter. Letterhead to someone named Bobby. Bobby had evidently written George, asking if he knew anything about the missing Muellers. Eaton's typewritten letter said, I haven't as much information as you have about the Muellers. I was never told by anyone on the mountain of their theory. The name you mentioned was the first time I had heard any names mentioned. Until I'm shown otherwise, I still believe it was professional hit squad. The theory about Strassmeyer and Brescia is not possible. Brescia was in Pennsylvania at the time of their disappearance, and Strassmeyer didn't have a car and didn't know where they lived. Strassmeyer is a patriot. The same as Bill. He had no motive to do him harm. A German patriot. Yeah, okay. The Mueller deaths is a complete mystery to me. Did they ever release the autopsies? Eaton later told a reporter that the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, I don't think there is any involvement with the Oklahoma City bombing or the other robbery, but it's a big coincidence that there were two big robberies like it in Arkansas. Eaton and Mueller told him that at the last militia-oriented church service, that they attended in December of 1995 that Mueller said he might be robbed. Oh, more highlighted stuff. Woo! Mueller's white Jeep Cherokee and trailer, in which they carried precious metals and guns, was found abandoned on a county road 17 miles north of Dover, Arkansas in February. Their bodies were recovered 27 miles away from that location. The actual murders on the second Mueller robbery were not the original suspects. It took months, but in 1997, two men were charged with the murders. Chevy Kehoe of Colville, Washington, and Danny Lee of Yukon, Oklahoma. They would have gotten away with it, but Chevy's little brother, Shane Kehoe, broke the case. I would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for Chevy. Both had ties to the ARA in Elohim City and therefore had knowledge of Mueller and their possessions. Chevy Kehoe, then 22, said that he and his brother were touring the South with their families, going to gun shows. When Chevy Kehoe told him about killing gun dealer William Mueller and his family, he said that Danny and him had decided to do a hit on the Muellers due to the fact that, for one thing, he thought that they were government informants, and he knew that they had a large amount of gold and silver stored in their house. Asked by prosecutors about Chevy Kehoe's attitude about the killings, Chevy replied at the plea bargaining trial, it was a braggart type attitude, a macho attitude. Chevy Kehoe said he continued traveling with his brother out of fear that he would be killed if he tried to leave him, then eventually camped in Ohio and returned from the gun show in Cincinnati when their vehicle was pulled over by police on February 15, 1997. The Kehoes on that date engaged in two shootouts, one with the Ohio State Trooper and a Clinton County Sheriff's deputy. If it was Clinton County. Huh. Let's see here. And with two Wilmington police officers in the second. The first one was taped by video camera mounted in a Ohio State Police State Highway Patrol cruiser. The shootout was televised nationally. Shane Kehoe later told law enforcement that he was unaware of the Mueller's deaths when he left on the trip with his brother shortly after Thanksgiving 1996. The brothers and their families went to Arizona, where Chevy Kehoe sold a gun that he said had belonged to the Muellers. A short while later, while preparing for another gun show in Galveston, Texas, Chevy Kehoe told his brother that he and Lee had dressed in police gear, broke into the Mueller's cabin, and surprised the family. Yeah, no-knock warrants, assholes. Bad idea. I think you're robbing my ass. Good God. Plus, didn't gangs in Baltimore do that shit too, where they would dress like cops and the other gang would be like, oh shit, we're being raided. And then they're like, ha, gotcha. Yeah. I'm telling you, no-knock warrants. Bad idea. This version is questionable because Mueller, a former Green Beret who's a survivalist and well-armed, would have been ready for such an eventuality. But whatever really happened that fateful day, Chevy Kehoe would be the undoing. After the Ohio shootout, the Kehoes fled separately and met up in Utah, where Shane, fearing for his own life, and after seeing the videotape of the shootout on America's Most Wanted, turned himself into authorities, revealing where his brother could be found. Brotherly love. Chevy Kehoe went to prison, receiving 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole, and Daniel Lewis Lee received a death sentence. Shane received 24 years in prison, because that's a plea bargain. But that would be reduced in 2000 to 11 years due to evidence problems in Shane's original trial. With credit for time served, Shane was released in 2008. Shane, along with his father, were arrested in Arizona in 2013 for possession of a hoard of firearms, which is a felony for both of them, having been convicted felons. On June 24th, 2014, Shane was sentenced to 3 to 4 years in prison, and Daniel Lewis Lee, as of this writing, is on death row in the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. Though there were several indicators that the ARA was involved in the edges of the Oklahoma City bombing, and even that Michael Brusha may have been with Dennis Mahon in Oklahoma City that day, it was obvious that they were not the main players for the reason the Murrah building was bombed. Even though Carol Howe and Mahon had cased the buildings when they stayed in Elohim City, even though Chevy Kehoe bragged about having a hand in helping McVeigh, the most I could find that linked them directly to the bombing, besides the above items, was the 33 guns found at Nichols' house. These were identified as coming from the Roger Moore robbery. Selling of these would have raised some cash when needed, but they were not sold prior to the bombing, which leads me to believe Nichols was hoarding them for his own gain at a later date if needed. I'll just invest in some guns. More doubt about JD Cash. I got some highlighted parts here. It was during this time that David Hoffman and others from Oklahoma City called to tell me that Glenn Wilburn had died of pancreatic cancer July 15th. 3 weeks before my initial fatal stay in the St. Francis ICU in August, I knew he had been battling disease, but he had hoped for the best for him and Kathy. I knew exactly what they were going through. Let's see here. So Craig Roberts was dealing with some health issues as well. As some of our probes into cash began to show items of interest, we began to find out more and more about the small town reporter. Hoffman called me one day and asked, "Have you heard anything about Dennis Mahon visiting Cash at his cabin in Idabel?" Idabel? It looks like it should be Isabel, but it's Idabel. No, I hadn't heard that. How did you find that out? Cash told me that Dennis Mahon had visited him allegedly for an interview. He said that they sat around drinking whiskey and that Cash, was trying to pry information out of Mahon about Elohim City, Strassmeyer, and McVeigh. Did he get anything? I asked. I had tried to pin Mahon down to in the past, but he was always very elusive in his answers. I don't know, Cash wouldn't say, but I can't help but wonder if he did find out anything we didn't already know. Yeah. So anyways, maybe let's try this part here. Same email I received from Hoffman clearing up how Larry Oliver got into the case. Cash convinced Wilburn to hire his former law professor from Tulsa University, Larry Oliver, to represent the Wilburns in their lawsuit against the government and McVeigh. In another email dated May 22nd, 1997, Hoffman had said one of his Israeli intelligence contacts about Cash and if they had anything on him. The contact got back to David and said Cash worked for the FBI and the CIA as a stringer in the early 1980s. He helped a doctor named Osher form a limited partnership for a clinic which opened ancillary branches in Guatemala and Nicaragua at the behest of the Iran-Contra gang. The purpose was cover for running drugs. This asset said Cash was a money launderer and his nickname was JD Cash Dollars. He knew Barry Seal, Larry Nichols, and others. JD Cash, man. I never heard any of this stuff. Down. So anyways, Yeah, it finishes up with the Central Intelligence Agency owns anyone of any significance in the major media. So yeah, interesting stuff about JD Cash. I don't know whether or not any of that is true. May have to ask a few people about that on like Twitter, but yeah, that is the ARA order Elohim City links, if you will, to the Oklahoma City bombing. And yeah, I skipped around a bit because I didn't really want to spend another hour on this. And next time, there is one chapter towards the end. And it's a fascinating chapter about McVeigh. And I'm gonna find it before I record tomorrow because like it was pretty eye-opening. It was basically saying like what they thought happened with McVeigh and all that stuff. But anyways, that's about it for me today. Hope everyone's enjoying the series. Keep on typing.